Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the last episode of Tales from the Fandom for 2017. It has been an amazing year, the first full year, and we're now less than 6 months out from hitting the second anniversary. I hope you've had a great time listening to the podcast this year. We've had guests from the United States, Australia, England, Canada, Hong Kong, and South Korea. From cosplayers, podcasters, gamers, authors, and friends, the Tales from the Fandom family has grown. We broke 10,000 downloads earlier this year. We were added to Spotify. We have backers on Patreon, Rebecca Parker, Brian Oxher, the Dungeons & Dragons podcast, and Justin Zenger from the Zing This podcast. Thank you guys for your support. If you would have asked me what my goals were for the podcast in 2017, I would have told you to keep having guests volunteer their time. And yet, I've been to 2 different conventions with press passes to cover those conventions. I've made friends I never would have made, or let alone talked to, by doing this podcast, and have become a part of a greater online community. Thank you to all of my guests and listeners for making 2017 such an incredible year. Be sure to check out the Facebook page, or the Facebook group, The Fandom of Tales from the Fandom. You can follow me at Twitter at TalesFTFandom. And if you want to support the podcast, you can find us on patreon.com/talesfromthefandom. Or you can find us on TeePublic just by searching Tales from the Fandom to purchase shirts or stickers or anything else with our logos. And there will be some more designs coming out soon. January kicks off on New Year's Day with Carrie McGinnis from Blazing Caribou Studios. On the 8th, we are joined by Kirk Dubé, aka Tug Mugbar, from the You Meet in a Tavern podcast. On the 15th, we have 2 releases, with Curtis Bolin of Dungeons & Dragons and Daughters, and we have Book Trek with author Emily Martin of the Creatures of Light trilogy. Book Trek, covering the Iron Druid Chronicles, will resume as soon as both Jaquel and I are able to get together to do recordings. On the 22nd, Lisa Ayanami joins to talk about fandoms, cosplay, and her podcast, I Love That Movie. And lastly, on the 29th, Lainey Hobbs of True Crime Fan Club podcast talks fandom and podcasts, and this is the first true crime guest I've had on. I hope this podcast, whenever you listen to it, finds you well and in a great place. Thank you, and I look forward to 2018 with you. And now, as usual, take a listen to a promo from another independent podcast, and then you'll get to listen to this episode. Have a great day, everybody.
You start.
If someone said to you, Mark, what is the Station Wagon podcast, that show you do with your sister? What would you say?
Our show's all about mindfulness.
That's too vague, specifically.
Yeah,
Outcomes.
okay, so you're always right and I'm always wrong.
Okay, perfect. But more specifically...
God. Taking a look at those things that we take for granted, giving them up for a while, and telling you how it goes so you don't have to do it.
Google us, the Station Wagon podcast, or at wagonpod.com.
And a Merry Christmas to everyone who celebrates. Otherwise, it is December 25th. And I am joined by a guest who you might have heard on the Hobbit 80th anniversary episode. His name is Brett. Brett is a podcast host of the Silver Screen and Politics podcast, and he's a journalist that resides in Chicago, the Windy City, which I imagine is going to be very cold in the December month. We're recording this early as usual. Welcome to the podcast, Brett.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. You know, I kind of hope it's cold because right now we're recording in September and it's 90 degrees out. So I'd like it to get a little cold by then.
Yeah, I have other friends in Chicago too, and it's blowing me away that the same temperatures that we're having down here in Florida are the same in Chicago. It's hard to just fathom that.
Oh, I'm not a fan of it. I want fall right now. I want, scarves and sweaters and all that jazz, and I'm not a big fan of the 90 degrees and hot and sweaty. But so hopefully when this episode comes out, I'll be able to listen to it in that apparel.
Yeah, I am not a fan of hot weather. We always wonder, like, why did we move back to Florida where we stay inside so much of the summer months? Because we just don't do outside 100+ degrees, and it's hot from like April to November, give or take. So it's not a fun time.
Well, thanks for having me on the show. It's a complete pleasure to be here. I'm a big fan of it, and I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, what are some of the fandoms that you are into just generally, or specific if there's certain ones that maybe people don't know about?
Yeah, so I believe what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about Stargate, and we're going to talk about the Warcraft and Blizzard universes and fandoms. They're somewhat separate and obviously intertwined, and I'm a huge fan of both those, and I have been for decades. And outside of that, I love everything from Star Wars to Doctor Who, and I'm so excited that by the time this episode comes out, I probably will have seen episode 8 10 times, and that'll be great, hopefully. So we'll see when we're listening to this in a couple months. But yeah, I'm a big Warcraft fan. I actually liked the Warcraft movie last year. I've played the games my whole life, and they're a very important part of my life, as is things like Stargate, the X-Files, stuff like that.
Okay, cool. What was funny about the Warcraft movie is, number one, I had no idea that they were even making it until I saw a trailer in the movie theater. Like, I had heard nothing about it. And I was like, what's this movie? It looks really cool. And then, the Warcraft banner popped up. I was like, what?
Yes. Yeah, it was I remember being so excited to follow the creation of that movie because it was so long in the making. Blizzard had been trying to make a movie for almost a decade. And to finally see it come to fruition, especially with someone like Duncan Jones, the director, who actually plays the game, and I think that is reflected in the film, was so cool.
I have not seen it yet. I think I have a digital copy on my computer somewhere, but I just haven't, dedicated the probably 2 hours of time to sit down and watch it. But I've heard good things about it.
I feel like that's how most people will end up watching it, just accidentally without realizing they own it, because at least in America, it was not particularly successful. It was wildly successful in Chinese markets, but they don't get big portions of those profits. So it's unclear whether or not that will bring a new film to light and let Duncan Jones come back and make a sequel. I hope that happens. I think it's fun fan service. I think a lot of the problems that people have with it are minute in comparison to what is good about it. But I'm probably in the minority of that opinion.
I remember as a kid, probably middle school. No, probably it's either late middle school or high school. I remember Warcraft coming out, and it was one of those first games that I got for my computer that could actually run that type of game. And I love this. Like, I love original Warcraft and StarCraft, but we'll stick to Warcraft for right now. Is that the same time that you got into it? Is right when it came out?
So I'm 21 years old. I'll be 22 the day this episode comes out. So my introduction to Warcraft was growing up playing Warcraft 3. That was one of the first games I ever played.
God, I was in college at that time.
Yeah, there's usually an age discrepancy amongst me and other podcasters. And I loved Warcraft 3. I loved the original StarCraft, and I've struggled with Diablo. I enjoy Diablo 3. I have to say it's the least interesting of the 3 tenets of Blizzard to me. I guess 4 if you include Overwatch now. But for me, Warcraft began as a passion when the actual MMO came out, World of Warcraft. And I played that starting day one. I have had a subscription to Warcraft for almost 13 years. So I started playing it really young. And I have had very intermittent times in which I haven't played it, but by and large, I've had that subscription the entire time.
That is amazing, because I played Warcraft 1 and 2 when they came out, and I played StarCraft, but then after that, when when Warcraft 3 came out, I never got it. I had friends that played it, and I just never picked it up for whatever reason. I don't know if it was because I was playing on the GameCube or on the PlayStation. I just never picked it up. Never picked Diablo up, even though I had a ton of friends playing that. And when World of Warcraft came out, I never got into it. I've never played the game since it's been released.
Really? Okay.
Not even a trial. The only MMO I ever played was like Star Wars Galaxies because I had friends that played it.
That was a good game.
But Warcraft, like World of Warcraft, I've never touched. I've thought about it, but I know how it is with dedicating that much time and investment into something, and I don't know if I can do that at the age and range, responsibilities that I have to do. And it's but I've heard good things about it.
Yeah, well, two things I would respond is one, shout out to the Star Wars Galaxies community, because that's still alive and thriving, even though the game is dead. There are fan-made servers of that still run that are fantastic. So if you ever want to get back into playing that, it's possible.
I've heard.
Yeah, and then two is that the nice thing about Warcraft, and it's a double-edged sword, is that the game has become very accessible in the last couple of years. If you buy the game, you immediately get a boost to a level 100, which means you're essentially skipping, 12 years of content. Which, as I said, is a double-edged sword, because as it gets easier to become accessible, that's wonderful. It brings in new players, 13 years on, which is incredible. The fact that it's held the titan of, world-dominating MMORPG for that long is nothing short of remarkable. And then I guess on the flip side, every once in a while I'll see somebody with something that I remember working insanely hard for like 7 or 8 years ago, and they're running by me with like 3 hours in the game, and I'm like, oh, damn. But you know what? You just have to accept that, because every year there's going to be new hard things to get, and then 2 years down the road, that thing will be easy to get. So you just got to get it while it's hard, if that's the challenge you want. So for newer players and people who don't have a lot of time, the game has become remarkably accessible, and that's wonderful for me, because when I joined this game, I was like almost 10 years old. I was really young, and I could sink a lot of hours into it. And, now in adulthood, I can't do that. I have work. I had college, for the last couple of years before I graduated, and I couldn't do that. And now I can, jump in Tuesday nights with my raid team and maybe a bit on the weekend and just have fun with it and not be too far behind.
That's awesome. I can't imagine. I look at my life now, and obviously I have work, and I work during the day, and I work at night, and I edit the podcast while I'm working, or I'm doing stuff with the kids or doing stuff with my wife during the weekends. And it's like, I don't have time. Like I buy games for the PlayStation or games on Steam, and they're untouched. And it's like, I'd love to make some time. It's so much stuff to do.
Oh yeah, I have such a vast and growing Steam library that is partly do the Humble Bundle, because you see something that's so inexpensive and you're like, oh, well, I can just send the money to charity, and that's how you justify it, and then you never play it. But yeah, it's a problem, and that's almost why I'm not terribly up to date with modern gaming, is because I only have time for like one gaming pastime, and if I'm going to make it one, I make it, Warcraft, and that's kind of it.
What's the draw that has kept you in Warcraft for the past 13 years?
I think a huge part of it is the storytelling. I love the story of Warcraft. In the early years, you look at Warcraft 1 and 2, and to an extent Warcraft 3, you see a lot of, Tolkien-esque fantasy storytelling. A lot of it's derivative, as is to be expected, because everything fantasy post-Tolkien is derivative to an extent. That's just the way it goes. But in the last, 13 years, the immense amount of storytelling that Blizzard has jam-packed into Warcraft to make it something so unique and so different, and have compelling characters and stories and emotional storytelling throughout the entirety of it. You become attached to characters, and you become attached to storylines and movements and ideas. And one thing Blizzard does really well, and has done increasingly well, is putting you into those scenarios so you feel like you're part of that story. and letting you experience it with your friends. And, Warcraft's always going to be more fun when you have friends that play it like I do, because it's not really meant to be a solo experience, even though it absolutely could be. So for me, the storytelling's a huge part of it. The fact that Blizzard has kept it so updated, by the time this episode comes out, we will very likely have the announcement of the next expansion, because that'll probably happen in November. And that's just another, whole new thing to delve into. It's entirely different than what we got a year and a half ago. And Blizzard has done an incredible job over the last expansion of keeping it updated. So I look at a lot of MMOs that I played over the years, and I played almost all of them. I played, Star Wars Galaxies and Lord of the Rings Online and EverQuest and all these other games, and none of them stayed as updated or as interesting as Warcraft.
It's hard to believe, looking back, because I remember when the first EverQuest or Dark Ages of Camelot, all those MMOs have just come and gone, and it's a game that was based off of a real-time strategy game that has continued to persevere, evolve, and keep itself alive, really. And it's not only just based obviously in America, it's all over the world at this point.
Oh yeah, and there are, every couple of years, it happens less so nowadays. I think we're at the point where MMOs are a niche genre. There aren't a lot of major companies pumping money into them because it's way more profitable to make a game like Overwatch or like, Destiny 2 that, has elements of the MMO, but it's not an MMO. But over the years, we've had so many games that were supposed to be the quote-unquote, Warcraft killer. Whether that was Guild Wars or Terra or Black Desert was, or Rift especially was, championed for a while like that. I'm trying to think what other. Ragnarok was big. Age of Conan was big. Lord of the Rings Online, Aeon, or The Secret World. I'm just thinking of so many off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
Final Fantasy 14, and none of them can do it because none of them have the dedication and perhaps the resources that Blizzard has. And one thing you can say about Blizzard is, like or hate their games, they breathe them, they live them. There is so much love and dedication that goes into them.
How much of World of Warcraft has, I guess it's hard to ask now after 13 years, but did they pull stuff from the RTS games like 1, 2, and 3 and bring that into the World of Warcraft MMO, or was it that they kind of started fresh and then have developed their, obviously they've developed their own thing over time, but are there elements from those early real-time strategy games, or is that kind of fallen by the wayside at this point?
Oh, there totally are. Perhaps most notably, they pulled a lot from Warcraft 3 in the last couple expansions. Well, not the last couple, but the last couple before the last couple. Wrath of the Lich King pulled heavily on Warcraft 3 because, Arthas and the character of the Lich King was a very, Warcraft 3 theme, as was Illidan, who was, the primary catalyst for the Burning Crusade before the Lich King. And then nowadays we're seeing Illidan return. Illidan returned with Legion, last year. And yeah, they pull a lot from them. I'd like to see them pull some stuff from Warcraft 2, because I'd love to see the high seas stuff, like the pirates and stuff. I think that'd be really cool. But that's what Warcraft fans say every year, and we never get that expansion, so we're never going to get it. But it would be cool to get it, and Blizzard knows that. But in any case, Pandaria was, pulled the pandas from Warcraft 3, because the pandas were originally a joke, they put the pandas in the game, and they thought it would be ridiculous to have this race of pandas, and then they became a fan favorite, and they said, oh, well, we might as well make an entire expansion out of it. And it's arguably one of the finest expansions they ever put out. So there are lots of traces of the previous storylines, and now they're at the point where they're building upon them. We're far beyond Arthas and the Frozen Throne from Warcraft 3. We're way beyond that at this point. So this is kind of them forging entirely new territory. But early on, there were roots in the RTS games.
Okay, that's awesome. One of the things that I really like about World of Warcraft, even not having played it, is that every time an expansion comes out, it's not like Blizzard is just pushing out something like just, okay, here's the latest expansion. It adds like nothing to the game, but we're making you pay for it. It's like a fully fledged, like, it's not like a DLC, how DLC has become like, oh, pay $5 and get armor for your horse or whatever. It's actually...
Oh, sure. Get the rest of the game we built in the first place.
Exactly. Like, it's actually, building on and adding more story and adding more, like, hours of playability. And just, that's the one thing that I really like seeing when they come out is these full-fledged trailers and adding like character options and race options and class options, and just seeing how they're developing the world, because I love like, as an old school like Warcraft 1 and 2 player, I loved like the world that we got to play in and exist in, and I like having, reading and seeing how it's developing. And that's one of the things that makes me want to play the game, is to get all that backstory, but now it's like 13 years of backstory.
Right. Yeah, they've done a terrific job at that. Every Warcraft expansion is an entirely new game added on top, and one thing I would give Blizzard also is that they're not, they don't, in addition to adding content to the game they've already built, they're not afraid to just, break the game they built for the better. And I say that, controversially about Cataclysm, which was fourth expansion. They get lost. But the Cataclysm essentially took the original, vanilla Warcraft, areas and destroyed them. The big dragon Deathwing came through and breathed fire and havoc throughout the entirety of the Eastern Kingdoms. And we were back in areas that we hadn't visited, since, 7 years prior to that, since we were leveling through the game for the first time. And there's the nostalgic loss of, you miss certain things the way they were, but then you also have to think, well, I bet Blizzard does too, but they had enough balls to break it, to bring us back. And I think that's something that's really cool about them. I guess if there's one expansion, I would say they didn't drop the ball, but the ball was kind of in limbo, was Draenor, the expansion that came out before Legion, so that would have been probably 2014 it probably came out. And Draenor was an excellent game. The new world they added was beautiful. The storyline was beautiful. The questing was compelling. It was really a great expansion. But the problem was that it was, for the first time, Blizzard really dropped the ball updating it. There were months in Draenor where we just didn't do anything. There was nothing to do. Like, I unsubscribed, which is, you have to, really push me to do that. A lot of people unsubscribed. And I think it was 14 months between content patches, which is insane. And nowadays, Blizzard has learned from that mistake with Legion, and we only go a couple weeks before, new stuff is being thrown at us, and there's always something to do. So, they're not afraid to break things. They're not afraid to try new things. And they're also not afraid to listen to their fans and figure out when they screwed up and how to fix that.
And it's amazing that they even have like their own convention at this point, like how huge it is.
Oh, BlizzCon's massive. And I guess it makes sense because I think a lot of these companies, Blizzard, included, all of them would like their own convention. I think Blizzard is in a unique position where the fans are diehard enough to come around the world to do it. But it allows them to control their message. They don't have to go through E3. They don't have to go through, Gamescom. So, it's awesome, and that's where I'm sure the highlight of Blizzard this year, and I might be totally wrong, will be laughing at me in December, is going to be the Warcraft expansion. We're going to get some sort of announcement about them maybe fixing up the old classic games because they've been doing that. And then maybe we get some new Overwatch stuff. And that's going to be great. I'm looking forward to all of it.
Now, with any person that I talk to about Warcraft, which I've only talked to a few people, but, there's always the standard fandom questions. And I guess the first one is, are you Alliance or Horde?
I am Alliance. And that is purely because I picked my allegiances when I was 9 and I wanted to be a dwarf. and that is all there really is to it. Because one thing that's nice about that is a lot of people look at Alliance as the good guys and Horde as the bad guys. And one thing Duncan Jones did super well with the new movie was that he showed you that there are no good guys and bad guys, that they are both good guys and bad guys. And the Horde can certainly be good, and the Alliance can certainly be bad. So, yeah, I'm an Alliance guy. I don't think I'll ever switch from that.
Is there a favorite like race or class that you play?
You know, I played a dwarf for probably 10 years, and I'm an anomaly in Warcraft players. I have played one character the entire time. I have a couple alts, alternative characters that I'll hop into and mess around with a little bit, but I have played one primary character the whole way through. And, you know, a couple years ago, I just got like so burnt with his name and burnt with his race, so I just switched. I changed his name, and you have to pay them to do this. I'm that guy, and then I changed him to an elf, so he's a night elf now, and I'm digging it. You know, I'm taller. That's a big plus. There's really no reason for that besides cosmetics, but sometimes I flip when I jump, so that's nice. I couldn't do that as a dwarf.
Yeah, I can't see dwarves flipping and jumping, but
no, they're very burly and they're very stocky, and you feel. I think part of it is like when you play a dwarf or a gnome in Warcraft, is that you just feel like you're slower. Like you're running at the same speed as everybody else, but you can't help but feel like they're going to get there first. And that's what I think. That's ultimately one of the things that drove me to switching to the tallest class.
That's funny. I mean, I tend to gravitate towards, like, when I play like Dungeons and Dragons, I tend to gravitate towards like halflings or dwarves, and they're penalized because or at least the halflings are penalized since they've got shorter legs, they can't go as fast.
Right.
but I totally understand. I know, like, when I played, and I guess in Galaxies it wouldn't have mattered because Galaxies you all have the same humanoid. They didn't have any short creatures, but yeah, I totally understand with having getting a taller character, at the very least. But yeah, 10 years, that's pretty incredible for keeping a character that long. You don't find that nowadays.
Oh yeah, and it's still the same dude. He's just got different race and name. So, but still the same character, all the same gear, all the same pets and mounts and all that good stuff. Not that it matters. Like 9/10 of that is account bound nowadays because people have like 10 characters. They want to use their mounts on all different characters, and that's just something I can't do. I don't have the time for it. I don't understand how some of my friends have, sustainable jobs and can play 10 alts, and more power to them. I just can't. And I think also I'm emotionally connected to my character, as stupid as that sounds. I feel like this is something I have invested, like literally like half my life in, so more than half my life. So I'm just gonna play this character and just that one.
Exactly. And I think it's the same way for other people too. Like, there are characters that I remember playing in like Dungeons and Dragons, and I still remember. I don't play them anymore, but I still remember them, and it's because I played them for such a long period of time that, I mean, I that's what I'd want to do, is play that character, or revisit that character.
Oh yeah, did you ever play Dungeons and Dragons online?
I never did.
That's still around, and I still think it's great. It is a great game. It is. I think you can get into it for free. And it takes like the elements of roleplay of Dungeons and Dragons and tries to put them into an MMO, and it kind of fails in some regards at doing that, but it's a really fun game. It's made by the same guys that make Lord of the Rings Online.
Okay, I'll have to check it out at some, maybe. I say I'll have to check it out. I don't really mean I'll have to check it out, because there's not any way that I could actually check it out. It's my time.
Well, listeners, it still exists and it's fun, but be wary, because it is a money sink, because since it is free, quote unquote free, you're going to be paying for a lot of stuff, to actually have fun. Which is, by the way, another thing I love about Warcraft is Blizzard has never messed around with that. It's a paid game. You pay $15 a month. We're all on the same playing field. And I really like that.
Yeah, I was going to ask if they had done stuff, DLC or, pay to play type stuff, but you just answered that question.
Yeah, I mean, they have, there's a cosmetic store. You can buy a couple different mounts and a couple different, pets that are purely cosmetic for cash. And there's also a new system where you can buy, gold selling was always a problem. And now they've attempted to fix that by, essentially offering a system for people, where the system is that there's an online auction house inside, Warcraft that allows you to buy what's called a game token. And you can buy it for, I think the running value right now is 150,000 gold, which is fairly expensive. And those game tokens are put on the auction house by people who spend $20 to get them. So if I spend $20 to get a game token, I get 150,000 gold, whatever the asking price is. If someone buys it for 150,000 gold, then they get a month of Warcraft. So it allows people to actually buy game time with in-game gold if they want, or vice versa, get an influx of gold by, paying money. But the beauty of Warcraft is that even if you have an influx of gold, even if you bought, 3 or 4 of these tokens, you still would have to work for the things that matter.
Okay. Well, there you have it. And now I'm super educated on World of Warcraft, which is a good thing, because I like following along at least with the trailers and the stuff that I see when people play it or share their videos on it.
Oh yeah, at least watch the cinematics every year because they're really cool.
Yes, they are. Now, another fandom that I'm really interested in discussing, because it's one of those, and we talked about it off mic before we started, is that it's very daunting to get into, because it's akin to like Doctor Who or Supernatural because of how many seasons there are and how many hours you'd have to put into it. And growing up, I remember the movie coming out into the movie theater, and now it's got a bunch of TV series, and you had told me that there's something coming out akin to like Star Trek Discovery web series, and that's Stargate.
Yeah, I'm a huge Stargate fan. I've watched it, ever since I was a kid, so it's something I have a deep love for.
Yeah, that came out in high school for me, and I remember like one of my friends was so blown away by it, like he would not stop talking about that movie and how cool it was. And I remember seeing it a few years later on videotape, back in the days of videotape. I was like, okay, yeah, this is cool. Like, I like the setting and the whole Egyptian premise, and thought it was a cool idea. And then I guess a few years later, Stargate TV series started rolling out.
Yeah. The movie was 94, and then the first series, SG-1, came out in 97.
I guess for me, my first question is, what draws you to Stargate? Like, what was it about Stargate that made you become like the fan that you are of it?
So, I think as a young boy in the beginning, like Stargate was more exciting than something like Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
They have guns and they go out and do military things, but on a more sophisticated level, the idea of the Stargate as a plot device is fascinating to me because it allows writers to go anywhere. You can literally go anywhere with the Stargate, and you can build whatever stories you want in whatever settings and people and races and cultures and stories that you want.
Mm-hmm.
And that really appealed to me because I love the idea of the Stargate. I love the idea of the Egyptian, iconography. And that was very cool to me. Later on, the other iconography they used, like the Atlantean type stuff, was really neat. And I just loved the characters. I love the way they told the stories. I'm not a huge fan of the film, to be entirely honest. I appreciate it, and I'm really happy it kicked off one of my favorite things.
Mm-hmm.
I just think I have trouble connecting to it because I started Stargate with TV and watched like all the TV shows before I ever saw the movie.
Right.
So I think I'm just disconnected from it. I think of these characters as these people in these settings, and then I go to the movie and like, hey, it's Kurt Russell. Because, for those unaware, when made the TV series 3 years later, it's the the same couple lead characters but recast. So Kurt Russell and is no longer in the movie, or in the TV series rather.
Exactly. And I think they've done that a few different times where they've taken the movie and turned it into a TV series, and it's like, okay, yeah, you're going to have to recast. I can't imagine, Kurt Russell or whoever else going to do a 24 episode TV series for the next couple of years. Oh yeah, well, I mean, they had big names in that movie. I guess they had two big names. It was Kurt Russell was really big, and James Spader was really big. And nowadays, James Spader actually does do a lot of TV. He does Blacklist on NBC. But yeah, at the time, they had to recast it, and ultimately they went with Richard Dean Anderson in his role, famous for MacGyver, and then a couple other fantastic actors, in the accompanying roles. And I think the chemistry of that works so well. They've had 3 different TV shows, Stargate SG-1, Stargate Atlantis, and Stargate Universe, and the shows live or die on the camaraderie of the cast, and it's always so incredibly good. Do you have a favorite of the series, SG-1, Atlantis, or Universe? I think it's got to be Atlantis, and it could have been Universe. And what I mean by that is Atlantis was a fantastic show. It had all of the benefits of showing up in 2004 rather than 97. So the effects were better. They had a more concrete idea of what worked with Stargate. So it kind of got rid of some of the rocky elements of the early years of SG-1. And also it knew when to stop. And it had a chance to stop. Because one thing I have problems with SG-1 is I think the beginning is slow, and I think the end is kind of slow. And I think everything in between is fantastic. With Stargate Atlantis, they had 5 seasons. They knew they had 5 seasons, and they did a lot with that. And then on the tail end, with Stargate Universe, which ran from 09 to 11, Stargate Universe got canceled way too early. It ends on a cliffhanger, and it was never supposed to. They thought they were going to get a 3rd season. So that could have been my favorite, and it's a great, great series. And in a weird, poetic way, the cliffhanger kind of works, but it could have been great, and the problem is that it didn't feel enough like traditional Stargate for fans to enjoy it. So fingers crossed for Discovery, because I hope Discovery doesn't have the same problem for Star Trek fans. Yeah, we shall see about that. I know I had a lot of friends watching Discovery last night, and their main criticism is not that the episode was bad. They obviously have nitpicky things about the episode, and all Star Trek first episodes, even first seasons, are not the greatest, but their big thing is that it's behind the subscription service on CBS. Oh yeah, I've heard 2 things about it. One is that people hate CBS All Access, which is fair. It's awful. And then 2 is that if you hop on Reddit and you look at the Star Trek subreddit, it's kind of funny because half of it is people that are like, hey, I don't really watch a lot of Star Trek, but I thought this was great. And then the other half is people doomsdayers are handing out pamphlets in the streets and the end of the world is coming because it doesn't feel like, old Star Trek. Star Trek is one of those fandoms that, you might get emails on this, but Star Trek is one of those fandoms where people get very set in their ways and really like it to be their Star Trek. And this is not going to be their Star Trek. My girlfriend has never seen Star Trek, and I know if I showed her TNG or the original series, she would not like it. But she loved last night's show. And similarly, you can say that about Stargate. The Stargate fandom did not like Universe because Universe didn't feel like previous Stargate. Instead of going through a gate every episode to a new world, they were stuck on a ship for most of the show. They only went off world a couple times. It was more of a drama with character development happening by interpersonal conflicts rather than experience than it was an adventure show. It was perhaps more akin to something like, Battlestar Galactica than it was, Stargate. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen with Discovery. I'm also hoping that doesn't happen with Origins, which is coming out tentatively December or January. We don't have a release date yet, but it'll probably be out by the time this episode comes out. Is it required to start with SG-1 and work your way through Atlantis and Universe, or can somebody just jump in and be like, I want to watch Atlantis and get the gist of what's going on?
You could totally jump in at Atlantis. That's actually what I did. I started at Atlantis first before I ever saw an episode of SG-1. The pilot of Atlantis does a really terrific job of explaining what the Stargate is and, you know, where it is and why they care about it and what they're doing, and kind of eases you into an entirely different program. You know, you could also start Universe the same way. They're all kind of separate entities, even though Atlantis and SG-1 actually overlap several times. It helps to watch them in order. You will be benefited by it. But if there's one that catches your fancy more than another, you could absolutely watch that. Regardless, you probably don't want to start like me. You probably want to watch the movie first, because that will clear up any, you know, confusion you have at the beginning regardless.
Oh, that movie. Listen, if you're watching the movie, just remember 1994.
Oh my God, yeah. It is not aged particularly well. But you know what? You can actually watch, one thing that's kind of neat now is that I believe Stargate's streaming either on Hulu or Amazon. Like, it's somewhere. You can stream it. But they just launched Stargate Command a couple weeks ago. It's like stargatecommand.co, because they couldn't really, you know, get the M, I guess, for com. But it's really great. It's basically their own streaming platform. You pay a $20 one-time fee, and you get access to the movies, because there are 3 of them, because they made TV movies later on, and all 3 of the TV shows, all commercialless, and then you also get access to the new show that's going to be coming out, commercialless. So that's kind of the way to go. If you want to get into it, that's your hub right now.
Okay, awesome. That's definitely, you know, you almost think about it, and you could, you know, if I was CBS, I'd maybe do that just for Star Trek.
Oh my gosh, that's totally what they should have done.
Pull Discovery out of CBS All Access, because, you know, there's a lot of, I hate to say it, but there's a lot of garbage on CBS, or stuff that's not geared towards people that want to watch Star Trek. And if they had been able to pull all their Star Trek stuff together and do something like that, that would have been like a one-time investment, and you get everything, would be phenomenal.
Oh my gosh, that would have been so much better. And the cool thing about Stargate Command is that, you know, the last week or so has been a little rocky, because they're still ironing out the website. MGM didn't pump a lot of money into it, because essentially they've openly admitted that Stargate Command is a test to see whether or not the franchise has a pulse. That's ultimately what they're doing. Origins is only going to be 10 episodes long every episode. You know, so we're only getting 10 episodes, 10 minutes long each. But it's for them to see whether or not they want to dump more money into it, which I'm totally open to. And that's ultimately what Discovery's going to live or die on as well, is whether or not people buy all access subscriptions. But the cool thing with Stargate Command is that there's forums, and there's, you know, trivia and quizzes and photos and extras from the movies and stuff. Why they couldn't have done that to create a community around Star Trek is beyond me. Because I have like this moral crisis right now. Like, I'm on the 1-week trial right now to see the first 2 episodes of Star Trek, and I don't even know whether or not I want to get this by paying this kind of, you know, greedy business model, $6 a month to watch commercials on an app that crashes constantly, or do I want to go ulterior way, you know, different ways? Do I want to watch it elsewhere? Wink, wink. Tweet me at Rivers Rubin in December, and I'll tell you which one I did. I still haven't made up my mind, but I just don't know, because it's so incredibly, you know, manipulative of CBS to approach it this way, especially when you're getting commercials when it's paid. Like, really?
And you know, the other thing, which I just found out, I guess yesterday while it was airing, is that the first episode apparently ends on a cliffhanger.
It does,
and you need to be able to watch the second episode, which is behind the paywall. And that in other countries, they get Discovery on, I think it's on Hulu, where it's like...
It's on Netflix.
Okay, Netflix. And it's like, why couldn't they have done that for us? I mean, obviously there's that reason that they want the $6 a month for the CBS shows, but...
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, and actually Canada gets it on the Space Channel, which you get if you have cable, and you can stream it on space.com. the internationally they get it on Netflix. We have to go through CBS All Access. You can't buy them on demand, which I would have done. I would have spent, $3 an episode to buy them. And that's what I've done for a lot of shows. And people are comparing it to, I've heard a couple people say, oh, well, you pay for Netflix or you pay for HBO. Well, Netflix has a lot more content, so it's justified. And HBO has good shows. So, it's worth paying for. There's more than one thing I want to watch on HBO. So it's a weird system, and I think it would have been really cool if they had a fee to opt into it like you could with this new Stargate thing. I really applaud MGM for that. And the other thing is like CBS is an over-the-air network. At least with MGM, Stargate was always either on Sci-Fi or Showtime. It was on both for periods. And both those are cable channels. So you had to have some sort of subscription to get it. You had to. But to put a paywall behind something I can turn on with an antenna, it's not really right. So I understand people's frustration. I'm probably going to pay because it's cool. But yes, it ends on a cliffhanger. And if you watched it with the football game last night, then a big giant screen pops up that says, and you can pay us now. It doesn't say that. More or less. And that's what you can do to get the second half of the episode.
Oh my goodness. I'll have to, I've got to check out the first episode and then see where it goes. I know, I was talking to the same person yesterday. It's like, dang, this is like Fox all over again, except at least Fox let us watch some of the episodes before killing the series and then letting them die.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's a problem. Or even frankly, or even if they had just kept it on the air, like I don't actually understand their logic, frankly, because I would think that they could sell more ads at a higher price by airing it in a primetime slot after football games than they would, putting it behind a $6 paywall that not a lot of people want to pay for. So economically, I don't quite understand the benefit of it. Ultimately, my guess is that we get a season or two and it might die, and then maybe something like Netflix picks it up because Netflix already has inroads because they're the international distributor, and they could very well say, well, we'll keep making it. They've done that before. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for, but who knows? We'll see.
Definitely. That is something to keep your eyes on. And if anything happens, I'll be sure to post about it or write about it or talk about it with somebody. So Brett, I've met you through a different podcast that you do or did, or however it's not. By the time this episode is out, I think you'll officially have gone through all your backlog of episodes.
Yes, unfortunately, a couple episodes after you came on, we took it out back and had to go the way of Old Yeller with it. But it was a great show while it lasted, and it's still available to listen to.
It is, but you are doing a new podcast now, at least one. The one that I know of is Silver Screens and Politics, and you wrote and said that it's a show that looks at politically themed films, and you dissect them to determine if the films are accurate or any good.
Yeah, so I'm doing a couple shows. That's one of them right now. And just so listeners are familiar, the show we were referencing was Geek Cinema Society. It's very much, if you like Tales of the Fandom, you'd probably get into it because we just talk about geek movies and had different guests on every week, and that's available still. But Silver Screens and Politics is something I do with my co-host Dominic Chikoki, and essentially what we do is we made a big list of political films, primarily films that deal with presidents. That was kind of where our focus lied, at least during season 1, which we've already recorded the entirety of, and so the seasons are 10 episodes long.
Okay.
And what we do is we look at the films, we watch them, and we talk about, A, are they good films? Spoiler, they're usually not. B, are they accurate? Are these sensationalist? Are they relatively true to form? What is the authenticity here? If we fact check them? And then we have some broader discussions about what their implications are. Because, for example, our first episode we did W, which is, or as Oliver Stone would prefer you call it, W, which is how he says it's pronounced. which was his biopic of George W. Bush. And then in our second episode, we did a film called Death of a President, which was a highly controversial film that explored an alternate reality where George Bush was assassinated in 2007. So what would happen if a sitting president was killed? And that allowed us to, look at Bush in a film sense, in a biographical sense, and then also look at a piece of media that explored him. And we ultimately, spoiler for the episode, we ultimately determined it's actually a very thought-provoking piece, and it's really not that controversial. They approach it with a lot of tact, but we were allowed to kind of explore that and say, okay, so what would happen? Like, what would happen if a sitting president got killed? How would this happen in a contemporary world? Because we haven't had that since 1963. We haven't had it attempted since the 80s. So we don't really know that we know of. Conspiracy theorists Twitter me. So we don't really know what that would be like. And then we also did films like The Wind and the Lion, which looked at Teddy Roosevelt. We looked at Wilson, a couple JFK films. We watched Dave.
Yes.
It's not about a real president, but it's in there. And that, so yeah, it's a fantastic show.
Yeah, there's the two movies that I was immediately thinking of, and it was Dave and American President. And I was like, maybe they watched them, because that would...
The funny thing is that American President should be in our second or third season. And when my co-host went out, he likes to buy these on DVD for reasons beyond me. And when he went out and bought Dave, it came in a box set with the American President. So, yeah, we're going to do both. And Dave was a lot of fun, mostly because it's hard to talk about Dave for an hour because the film doesn't have a lot of substance. So it just evolved into us plotting out the subsequent sequels to Dave, and the different genres that those would embody that eventually end up in science fiction drama. So, yeah, I love Dave. It was our guilty pleasure episode.
Now, how did you come up with the concept or idea of doing this? Because it's not something, you think about. It's not something that for me would immediately pop into at least my head. So where did you come up with the idea for it?
Whenever I say things, people say it's not something they would, pop into their head or any right mind, and that's okay. But yeah, it was a labor of love to combine two different types of podcasting, which I really enjoy. I love film podcasting. That's why I did Geek Cinema. It's why I'm doing this show I'm developing right now. And I love politics. I am a political reporter, and my roots in, political podcasting, really are, date back to this January, because I was in DC during the inauguration reporting, and I, did a lot of, podcast reporting from the inauguration. So to combine those two and be able to talk about films and also, be able to talk about politics, because one thing we do that I should also specify is we talk at length about how those compare to contemporary politics and how is this, narrative actually interesting in the broader scope of what we're dealing with now. For example, our first episode, we talked a lot about, the havoc that George W., kind of moved his way and tried to navigate through, largely unsuccessfully, during his second term, and how in the grand scope of things that people don't like presidents for and things that presidents do that are outrageous, it's like nostalgic. It's nothing in comparison to what we have now. And I mean that, one thing we do is we don't really get into party politics. We both have our views and we don't share them that often. But you can look at someone like Trump and bipartisanly agree that it's kind of crazy right now. So to look at that movie when they're thinking the Bush years were crazy, no. So yeah, we look at contemporary politics as well. Okay.
Is there any movie that you're looking forward to doing this that you? I don't want to give away season one or anything, because people should subscribe and listen. But is there a movie that's on the horizon that you really just want to tackle as far as political presidential movie goes?
So, well, we can spoil the entire, first season because it's listed on our site. We want people to be able to know what's coming up. In terms of what's already recorded, I think we did a movie called The Bystander Theory, and The Bystander Theory was so offensively awful in so many ways that make me want to tear my hair out and like throw my computer out the window. And that's kind of what I love about it, is it's just so offensively bad. Essentially it's a film about this woman who finds she finds a gun in her attic, and she's like, hey, maybe my grandfather killed JFK with this. Because keep in mind, we delve into the weird films too. And then she finds like the rest of the Zapruder footage and learns about her, grandpa's like eerie past of being the JFK assassin. It was terrible. That was a fun one though. In terms of what I'm looking forward to moving forward, I'd like to do Jackie. I think Jackie's a really fascinating film because while it doesn't look at a president, it does look at someone close to a president who had to assume kind of a presidential role in some ways. So I think that's a fascinating film. I thought All the Way, the HBO film from a couple years ago, was also very fascinating. I'm fascinated by the Kennedys, by the Kennedy and post-Kennedy era, right, in that mid 60s era. So I'm really looking forward to both those. And one thing I can say is what I'm not looking forward to. I don't program our lineup. That is the job of my co-host, Dominic. And in season 2, which we're recording now, we have the 3 film series that was the Gettysburg films. So I think it was Gettysburg and Of Gods and Generals, and there's one more. I can't remember what the other one was. They're like 10 years apart by the same director. And I can't tell you how much I'm not looking forward to that because those movies are like 4 hours long and they're not good. But
I remember when Of Gods and Generals came out, I think because I was working at Blockbuster, it's like a 2-tape set. Oh my gosh, yeah.
Oh my god, I'm not looking forward to it. They're all made by Ronald Maxwell, and there's a third one in there. I can't remember the name of it. And the only redeeming thing of Gods and Generals to me is that there's a Bob Dylan song in the soundtrack that's really good, and he shows up in the movie at one point. But they're going to be miserable. But you know what? The fun part of the show is that we're miserable for you, so you don't have to go out and watch any of these films. So I'm going to go through that horror sometime in the next couple weeks.
And besides Silver Screen and Politics, you are working on a few other projects that you may be able to talk about?
Yeah, so I can drop some info on the Geek Cinema follow-up because it'll be out by the time this show comes out. Myself, David, and Nicole are working on a new show called Movie Go Round, and Movie Go Round is a themed podcast discussion show that we'd love to have you on at some point. We can talk about that after the show. And essentially what we do is there is a rotating schedule of 5 weeks that has 5 different themes that range from Netflix Roulette, which is where we watch anything the spinner lands on, to future classics, where we look at films that are going to be, in our opinions, a future classic, to international films, to all sorts of, to new to 2 is one of our things, 1 week where one of the hosts has seen a film and the other 2 have not. So essentially, every single week there's a different theme, and then after 5 weeks it rotates and it's back to the first one. And it's going to be a lot of fun. It gives us a lot more freedom than Geek Cinema ever did in terms of the format, in terms of the films we're watching, because it's not just geeky films. And we're really looking forward to doing that. It's going to be out again called Movie Go Round. Outside of that, I did an investigative journalism series earlier this year, actually, called Exploring the Blues in Chicago. And that was where I went around Chicago and I talked to record producers and musicians and historians and family of famous, blues icons. And I chronologued the history and contemporary of the genre of Chicago blues. So if you're a music fan, that's going to be out on, my network in the next couple weeks. So it'll be out by the time the show comes out. And that was produced by a woman named Terry Hemmert. And Chicagoans will be familiar with her as the longtime, XRT DJ. So on WXRT for CBS. So that's coming up as well.
Awesome. Definitely, as far as music goes, I think for me, I love listening to like the classic like classic rock and classic blues and the classic sounds from that don't exist to this day, or if they do, they're in a very small niche or subsection that I guess I don't hear at this point. But I love getting to learn about stuff like that. Like that's one of the things I think about, like VH1, where they would do those investigative, take a look back at this, musician and how he grew up, or like I remember when my friend got me into like people like Muddy Waters and musicians of that, that type, and is fascinating to hear their stories, and that sounds like a great podcast to listen to.
Thank you. Yeah, I got a lot of that on the show. I got the opportunity to sit down with Bruce Iglauer, who was the founder of Alligator Records, still is. He still runs Alligator, and Alligator, produced everything from, Mavis Staples to the stuff you hear nowadays, and it's an incredible repertoire of music. If you love, classic blues music, you've heard Alligator Records. And then I also got to talk with the family of all sorts of different, blues icons. I got the opportunity to go to Lonnie Brooks's funeral when Lonnie died earlier this year, which was an immense honor and such a learning experience for me to be in that community of Chicago blues musicians. Because one thing I learned is that it's a very close-knit community. Everybody who plays Chicago blues knows everybody else, which made getting interviews progressively easier because all you had to do was talk to one guy and he'd send you the 4 more. So, that'll be out on tiltingwindmillstudios.com, which is actually where you can find pretty much every show I do.
And that's what I was going to say is, where can people find you? But you answered that one too. So if beyond Tilting Windmill Studios, is there any other like social media that you guys have?
Yeah. So tiltingwindmillstudios.com. If you want to connect with me on Twitter, that's the best place to contact me, place I'm most active. And that is at Rivers Rubin. That's RIVERS RUBIN under Brett David Stewart there. And you can also search, Rivers Rubin on Facebook as well to connect with all of my music, because I'm a musician myself and that's my stage name. So that's why I'm giving you that name. So those 3 places are the best place.
Awesome. Well, Brett, I'm super excited that you were able to come on for this podcast, just because you've got a ton of stuff that was awesome to talk about. And, there's obviously more behind Warcraft and Stargate that we could definitely delve into, and hopefully you will come back for another episode in the future.
I would love to. Thank you for having me. It was fun.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/talesfromthefandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.